Okay.
Are we starting it up?
Yes, we are.
Okay, Suzanne, what was your question?
Oh, I wrote it on the,
On the chat.
yes, and the question was, I was just wondering how Mira got the title, The Mother, and the significance of that title.
Oh boy, you asked a tough question. I don't know the actual date when that started to become her title. I think it probably was a gradual thing that came into use as the disciples interacted with her and received her guidance. I don't think there's a specific, I've never seen anybody mention a specific time when that title came into effect. So
I met someone once, long,
Yeah.
long time ago, who somehow knew the mother. And the way he described her as very tough teacher. So I know nothing about her life really. So I was just wondering how she acquired that title and what kind of person she.
I think she was deeply mystical, and must have been because Aurobindo looked to her as an equal.
Mhm.
And you've already seen evidence of him. And I have to admit that I'm just sort of, I struggled as I was writing this because I realized that I couldn't do justice to both of their lives. It was just,
Mhm.
you know, I would have had to double the length of the course just to be able to
Yeah.
say what needed to be said about her life. I have a lot of resources, but we just couldn't divert our attention. So, and she's more approachable in her writings and her dialogues with people.
Okay.
It's easier to understand than some of
Mhm.
Aurobindo, particularly in this philosophical stage that he went through.
Hmm.
So
Mark,
you asked, sorry,
Mark.
you asked a two-part question though, Suzanne. The first was, when did she get the title? And what was the second thing that you asked?
Well, a little bit about her, like her character. I had just heard from someone many, many, many years ago that she was a very tough teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just, but as you said, you couldn't concentrate on both. I understand that.
No. Now, Linda, is Sunisha online at the moment?
No, she's not, Mark.
Oh, it's too bad, because she actually lived in Auroville for a year. And so she would probably be able to help us formulate a better picture in our heads as to what she was really like.
It'd be
Ingrid had a question, Mark. She's wondering what took Mira to Japan.
That's a very good question too. Okay, I'm gonna have to do some research and answer these things by email. So, yeah.
It is also interesting because as you described it, they became one somehow. Isn't that what you said, Mark?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not physically. They
Well,
didn't
not-
have that
yeah.
kind of a relationship, but yeah. I'm just writing myself some notes so that I can do a little research and get back to some of these questions, which are very good, but I'm not prepared to answer at the point.
So here's a comment from Durham, Mark.
Yeah.
After a few years, Richard was ordered. Oops, I lost your comment there, Durham. Where is it? Chat. To promote French trade in Japan, which is an ally of France and Britain and China. Mira left for Japan along with Richard, never to return to Paris again.
Oh, very good. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Durham.
Hey, that's a very good answer to Ingrid's question. So that one we can worry. I can take off my list. Are there other questions? Thank you, Durham. That was excellent research on the spot.
I find it interesting that that Mira stuck with Richard, whereas Sri Aurobindo kind of left his wife in Calcutta,
Mhm.
and she died. I don't know how many years she was there alone. I guess living with family. But
Mhm.
just interesting.
Yeah.
Belinda wants to say something.
Oh,
Yeah,
please.
I had a question about Mr. Richard. What happened with him? Did they separate? Was there a divorce? Did he die? Because at first it seems like there's the three of them, and then suddenly he's not there anymore.
Yeah. Again, I need to look it up. Sorry.
Okay.
The amount of material I'm dealing with is quite large, and it would be a separate study to focus on the life of the mother, I have to say. But I'll write this and see what I can find out for you. Unless Durham can find it quickly.
Okay, that's one.
Durham can find it quickly. He better.
And just to captivate your interest, I was just reading in Mr. Baliuzi's biography of Abdu'l-Baha. I think it's on page 324, that Abdu'l-Baha stayed up until midnight talking to Mr. and Mrs. Richard about things that they were interested in Paris in 1913. So they met and knew Abdu'l-Baha and had a great respect for him, but never became the highest. So anyway, okay. So sure, I'm sorry to be so unprepared for these questions, but what can you do? Anybody else have a question? I see we have another chat here.
Yes, they were divorced. The
Okay,
answers in the chat.
okay, there we go. Well, you're a valuable guy to have on a call like this, I have to say.
You're welcome.
Now, let's come back to the readings. Okay, so we left with the idea that the disciples were anticipating a major development in Aurobindo. November 24th, 1926 is known as a special day of attainment or day of Siddhi for Aurobindo. A Siddhi is a Sanskrit word which designates the accomplishment of the aims of yoga. Purani, who was present at the ashram on that day, provides us with a description of the external circumstances of the event, which is number 10. So where are we at here? How about Lisa? I see you were in the audience. Are you feeling up to reading tonight?
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
There was a deep silence. Many saw an oceanic flood of light rushing down from above. Everyone present felt a kind of pressure above his head. The whole atmosphere was charged with some electrical energy. With a slow, dignified step, the mother came out first, followed by Sri Aurobindo with his majestic gait. Silence absolute, overflowing with divinity. The meditation lasted for about 45 minutes. After that, one by one, the disciples bowed to the mother. After the blessings, in the same silence, there was a short meditation. In the interval of silent meditation and blessing, many had distinct experiences. It was certain that a higher consciousness had descended on earth.
So, from what I've read, it was apparent to all those present that a spiritual breakthrough had been achieved. This fact was later confirmed by Aurobindo himself in his evaluation of the experience. Okay, how about Bill Kelly? Number 11.
Did you warn everyone, Mark?
Pardon?
Should you warn everyone that this is quite lofty?
Yeah,
Sorry.
you may not understand some of the terminology that's being used here, but I promise I will explain it in coming weeks. So just go with the flow as best you can.
Question. Some say November 24th is a day of victory. By that, some mean that the supermind, supramental consciousness descended into the physical consciousness of Surya Aurobindo. Others say it was the coming down of Krishna into the physical consciousness. If it was the descent of Krishna, does that mean the descent of the supramental light? Answer. Krishna is not the supramental light. The descent of Krishna would mean the descent of the overmind Godhead preparing, though not itself actually bringing the descent of supermind and Ananda. Krishna is the Ananda Maya. He supports the evolution through the overmind, leading it toward his Ananda. Question. What I wanted to know was whether the 24th November was the descent of the supramental light or of Krishna's light. Why are we observing the 24th as a special day? Answer. It was the descent of Krishna into the physical.
So I just finished writing the class on the overmind and the supermind today. And that's in class number 7. So it's going to be a while before we get around to this. But just to summarize briefly what's being talked about, is there are higher levels of mind beyond normal mental capacity. And in Aurobindo's system, they're called the higher mind, the illumined mind, the intuitive mind, the overmind, and then the supermind. So what he's saying here is that this particular event on the November 24th was a descent of the overmind into his physical reality, not the supermind. And the distinction will become, I hope, a little clearer later in the course. But just to give you an idea of what he's actually talking about, it meant something to people who had been communicating it with him one-on-one up until this point. It was the first time the overmind had descended in Aurobindo's own experience. So, about 2 weeks before he died, Aurobindo gave the following clarification. So this is, let's see here. How about Joey? This is a short one, but a good one.
Reading 12. What happened on the 24th November prepared the possibility of this descent, the supramental, and on that day he, Sri Aurobindo, retired into seclusion and entered into deep and powerful meditation. November 20th, 1950. Letters on himself and the ashram.
So, to summarize, Aurobindo's day of Siddhi was thus not the final victory in his spiritual endeavor. Nonetheless, it was an all-important intermediate development. It brought with it the exhilarating promise of a future descent of the supermind into physical evolution for the first time in human history. Following this overmind experience, Aurobindo wrapped himself ever more deeply in seclusion. Prior to November 24th, his disciples had been able to have pranam and darsham almost daily. So I need to explain what those are. Pranam, which is also known as namaste, is the joining of palms and bowing of the head in reverence and submission to God. It is also offered in recognition that God is supreme and the refuge and protector of all. The faithful utter God's name and pray, seeking his grace and blessings for peace and happiness. And people, individuals will do a namaste in order to salute the God inside each other. Right? We talked about the trust of God in the first class. So within each of us, there is that trust that's been placed there that we probably don't know very much about. But it's a form of respect to do pranam to that dimension of each of us. After Aurobindo's day of Siddhi, they were limited to 3 days of darshan a year until 1938, after which it occurred 4 times annually. However, unlimited written communication with Aurobindo was always available. All personal spiritual contact was now centered in the mother. This outward state of affairs was to change but negligibly during the remaining 24 years of Aurobindo's life. Darshan, as you may already know, is a type of Hindu blessing involving the viewing of an eminent person, particularly a religious leader. One of those who has left a record of the last darshan of Sri Aurobindo and the mother on November 24th, 1950, just 2 weeks before Aurobindo died, was an American philosopher by the name of Rhoda Lecoq. She's got a wonderful explanation of that experience. Who gets selected to do this? Jack, you're here, aren't you, right?
You have to unmute yourself, Jack.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, number 13.
Yes, please.
As a Westerner, the idea of merely passing by these two with nothing being said had struck me as a bit ridiculous. I was still unfamiliar with the Hindu idea that such a silent meeting could afford an intensely spiritual impetus. I watched as I came up in line, and I noted that the procedure was to stand quietly before the two of them for a few silent moments, then to move on at a gesture from Sri Aurobindo. What happened next was completely unexpected. As I stepped into a radius of about 4 feet, there was a sensation of moving into some kind of a force field. Intuitively, I knew it was the force of love, but not what ordinary humans usually mean by the term. Then all thought ceased. I was perfectly aware of where I was. It was not hypnotism, as one Stanford friend later suggested. It was simply that during those few minutes, my mind became utterly still. It seemed that I stood there a very long and uncounted time, for there was no time. Only many years later did I describe this experience as my having experienced the timeless in time. When there at the darshan, there was not the least doubt in my mind that I had met two people who had experienced what they claimed. They were Gnostic beings. They had realized this new consciousness, which Sri Aurobindo called the supramental. Rhoda Lecoq, the Radical Thinkers, Heidegger, and Aurobindo, page 199, etc., etc.
So I've never had that experience myself, but darshan, I don't know if any of you have. I know Linda was telling me that she saw a darshan occur with Guru Maya, Was that in Vancouver?
That was in Vancouver, and I was with friends. We didn't go up, but we saw many devotees go up, and obviously something very powerful was experienced by them.
Hmm. Has anyone else online had any kind of experience like that? I chose
Mark,
this particular.
Mark, do you mean before two beings or
No,
meeting?
no, just a spiritually evolved person, where it was a formal kind of standing in front of them. I personally chose this particular person and her explanation because she was a Westerner, and I thought we could probably all relate to this feeling of, isn't this ridiculous? But to have her experience be what it was, I thought might at least give us pause to think maybe there's something to it.
Mark, Lori has her hand up.
Oh, does she? Okay, hi, Lori.
Hi, I was just thinking, this is from quite a few decades ago in the Gloucester, Ottawa area. I never traveled there myself, but there were Baha'is that I knew who would travel out to see someone who was, I think, a faith healer. And I never understood the experience, but I think some parts would have to be similar. Nina, do you remember?
Yeah, I
What-
do. I
Yeah.
do. It was actually, I think it was Don Dainty who told my mother-in-law he used to go, and then she went there. Jamal went there because he had something. Anyway, it was about, I'd say about 2-3 hours drive. They used to stay in a van or something, few of them. And he was a healer. Yeah, he was. But I know of, if I may talk, do I have a minute or?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so my brother-in-law, Glenford Mitchell, is Jamaican. And there was a healer in Jamaica that, honest to God, he was amazing. He was very young, and Glenn's brother had some health issues, and he was telling him about, and the guy, even before he knew him, he basically told him what to do. He came here in Ottawa and came to our house, met Jamal. He knew nothing about him, and he told him exactly what he had. We took him back, and in few years after, I was looking for him, and all that I know, he was 49 and he passed away. So I contacted somebody who knew him here in Ottawa, and she said, we don't know why, it's almost like God wanted him. When he was in our house, I asked him, I said, what happened to you? He said, and how did you come with this? He said, I knew nothing about medicine. I have no idea about herbs or healing, nothing. I was at a disco actually with one of my cousins, and I was very sad, sat in the corner, and all of a sudden something came onto me. And I know everything about herbs and about healing. And that's exactly what happened. It's almost like somebody poured something on him, and all of a sudden he said, I never studied, nothing. I mean, if I didn't encounter that, I wouldn't have believed it. Seriously.
No.
Yeah.
Mark, can you see that Jack has his hand up?
No, I'm not looking at
Oh,
the
okay.
chat at all,
Okay.
or the participants.
Jack, you had your hand up?
Yeah, well, there are many different types of mystical experiences, and one I could relate. I've had many in my lifetime. They've actually started in childhood. When I was a young man, I attended a Baha'i youth meeting with Hand of the Cause, Mr. Khadem, whom, as we all know, had an out-of-worldly love for Shoghi Effendi. In fact, his son Mojan Khadem told me that he knelt in front of the guardian. The guardian disapproved that and said, "You must not do that. The confirmations of God will not reach you." Anyway, if you can imagine this, but I actually did this. Mr. Khadem was speaking on the stage. I think we were at York University. And I think he started to chant in Persian, Ye Bulbul, O nightingales of God. You know that passage in Gleanings. Okay, so I was sitting somewhere near the back. So I know that these transcendental states are absolutely real because nobody in your normal mind would do this. Now, this is the only way I can explain it. If you can imagine a magnet, a giant magnet over Mr. Khadem's head, and you are a little tiny iron filing, could you resist that power? No, you couldn't. So I went into some other realm. It was not in this world. It must have been the Valley of Love because I left my normal mind, right? I was not in my normal mind at this point because nobody in their normal mind would do this. So I got up out of my seat. I walked all the way down through the audience while he was speaking, walked up on the stage and threw my arms around him in the middle of his speech. And I mean, the people thought, must have thought, what is this guy doing? And I remember he looked at me and said, God bless you. And then I turned around and walked down and the tears were streaming down my face at this point. I didn't understand that experience for many years. I mean, I knew it was a divine love of some kind. And years later, I met Mrs. Khadem at a national convention and I said to her, you know, Mrs. Khadem, I had this very unusual experience with your husband. And I told her what had happened and she looked at me and she said, oh yes, that was the love of Shoghi Effendi. Well, I don't know if it was or it wasn't, but whatever that love was, it was so great that for a few moments I became a Majnun. I mean, you couldn't function normally in the state I was in because it's not a functional state where you can do anything. Now, I imagine in the next world, it may be like that all the time, but anyway, I know these things are very, very real. They are real, but normally we don't access them. And I'm not saying I'm anybody special, and I'm saying that I never tried to induce these experiences in my life. I have never tried to do that. But when they happen spontaneously, and you just can't explain it.
Okay, let's switch back to our screen sharing here. I have to go back to this chronology. Now, in order to cope with the richness of this fellow's life, I created this detailed chronology just to allow you to pick up some of the things that were happening in his life. So, for instance, Aurobindo wrote a book called The Mother, which is about Mira Richard, way back in the 20s. Still in that same year, he met the famous Indian poet, Tagore. Let's see. Now, during this period of 1930 to 38, he's spending a great deal of time on his poetry, particularly Savitri. And then all of a sudden in 1938, he fractures his right leg. One of the things he did was he walked about 8 hours a day in his room. That was one of his forms of meditation. But for some reason or other, he stumbled or something and he broke his leg. So that meant that there were certain impacts as a result of that. One of them, that correspondence that he was having that kept him up all night with his disciples stopped. And then, but he did start to have contact with some of the disciples who were taking care of him physically at that point. He was getting to be an old man by this stage. By 1940, he had revised The Life Divine and published it as a separate book. And then, of course, in 1939, there was the declaration of World War II. A year later, the two of them came out and supported the Allies in World War II. And he put his spiritual force behind the Allied war effort on more than one occasion because he saw that the tide was not going according to the Allies' side. Anyway, you can follow this. It is a list of many of the publications that he produced during this period of time. Now I want to show you what he looks like in 1950. This was, I think, a beautiful photograph of him near the very end of his life. So on December 5th, 1950, after a brief kidney ailment, Aurobindo died in the presence of the mother. For many years, he had exerted his yogic force to counteract impending illnesses. 6 days before his death, his disciples became increasingly anxious. Let me see. Danielle, could you read this number 14 for us?
It was the well-beloved, ever-faithful Champaklal who ventured to put the crucial question to the master. Are you not using your force? No, came the ominous reply. But why? If you don't use your force, how is the disease to be cured? Interposed Nirod. Can't explain, came the imperturbable reply. You won't understand.
So from this, the mother and his disciples concluded that he had chosen to allow this mortal illness to enter his body. They remained mystified as to the reasons behind his voluntary dying until after his death. The legal maximum time for a body to remain unburied in the tropics is 48 hours. Therefore, everyone expected the burial to take place on December the 7th. But the mother posted a notice delaying the event on that day. That I'm going to turn to Jack for number 15.
I already read, Mark.
Oh, did you? Okay, how do we get out of order? Okay, Peter Manier.
The funeral of Sri Aurobindo has not taken place today. His body is charged with such a concentration of supramental light that there is no sign of decomposition, and the body will be kept lying on his bed so long as it remains intact. Iyengar Sri Aurobindo, a biography and a history.
So a visible golden glow remained around Aurobindo's inanimate body for more than 100 hours. Only then did the first signs of decomposition begin to appear. The doctors present were confounded by the phenomenon, especially given the heat of the southern Indian climate. For the mother and the disciples, on the other hand, it was the indisputable answer to the mystery of Aurobindo's death. The glow they were seeing heralded the descent of the supermind into the physical world, the completion of Aurobindo's spiritual quest. His bodily death had been a profound self-sacrifice. Van Veckrum sums up their thoughts nicely in this next quote. And I'll ask Zilda if she would read that one.
Okay. Sri Aurobindo entered death voluntarily. The mother said in the same month of December 1950, he was not compelled to leave his body. He chose to do so for reasons so sublime that they are beyond the reach of human mentality.
So this is what he looked like at the time. After examining all the evidence, Van Beckrum concluded that Aurobindo had indeed not died because of a law of nature deemed unbreakable. Okay, so let's see, that would be Hangame.
For sure. Number 17. Sri Aurobindo has not gone the way of all flesh, like human beings before him have and still do. He did not die because of a law of nature deemed unbreakable. In the aforementioned words of the mother, he was not forced to leave his body. He has chosen to do so. When Sat Prem was writing his Sri Aurobindo,
or the adventure of consciousness, is what it's translated as. Go ahead.
He read twice or three times a week the last pages he had written to the mother. Having arrived at Sri Aurobindo's passing, he wrote that Sri Aurobindo on 5 December 1950 had succumbed, using the French word succomb. The mother corrected him at once. He has not succumbed. It is not so that he was not able of doing otherwise. It is not the difficulty of his work which has made him depart. It is something else. You must use another word than succumb. Really, it was his decision that things would be done in another way, because he was of the opinion that the result in this way would come about much faster. But this is a complex explanation which for the time being regards nobody. But one cannot say that he has succumbed. Succumbed evokes the thought that he did not want to die, that it happened all by itself, that it was an accident. It cannot be succumbed.
So there was an intentionality to his death that was a bit of a mystery to people at that point. From the evidence that I've seen, you could say that Aurobindo had strategically withdrawn from physical life. He did so knowing that the mother would be left behind. He believed that she was better suited to the rigors imposed by the process of supramentalizing the body. He would support her from the non-physical realms as she finished their joint task. He had succeeded in bringing down the force and light and love and bliss of the supermind into the human mind and vital. Some 6 years later, she would finally bring the supermind down into the cells of her own physical body, thus establishing this divine capacity as a possible outcome for others in the future. So the mother was to outlive her collaborator by 23 years. It was a period full of activity of all kinds. So we can only point out a few significant milestones in passing. In 1951, the remaining parts of Aurobindo's final poem, Savitri, were published. And at the same time, I should mention that Pearl S. Buck and other prominent authors had planned to nominate Aurobindo for the Nobel Prize for Literature based on Savitri, but he died before their nomination was put forward. So, as I've already mentioned, the mother was the one who shattered the golden door between the overmind and the supermind, allowing the supramental consciousness to descend right into the depths of the physical earth for the first time in history. This took place on February 29th, 1956. This is sort of what she looked like. This was taken just about 4 or 5 years before this. Here is her own record of the event written on the day itself, but only made public 4 years later. Well, that's number 18. So, is Sylvia online?
No, she's not here this evening.
Okay. Let me see. Jeffrey, are you feeling up to writing or reading tonight?
Is that Mary? Mary?
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I'm not. I can't read it. Okay, okay.
Number 18.
This evening, the divine presence, concrete and material, was there present amongst you. I had a form of living gold, bigger than the universe, and I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. As I looked at the door, I knew and willed in a single movement of consequences that the time has come, and the lifting with both hands a mighty golden hammer, I struck one blow, one single blow on the door, and the door was shattered to pieces. Then the supermental light and force and consequences rushed down upon the earth in an uninterrupted flow.
So, I mean, we're just gonna have to take her word for this. There's no way we can judge it one way or the other. But this is her evidence of what she had actually done, that she had broken the barrier between the overmind that I talked about earlier and the supermind, which allowed the light and force and consciousness of the supermind to flow onto the physical world. So strangely enough, she found that the people in the meditation room at the time, which included children, disciples, and visitors, hadn't noticed anything special had happened. The mother was quite surprised by what she saw. Here's what she said to a disciple 9 months later. Let's see, is David Oak still here?
Yes, he is.
Oh, good stuff, David.
I'm very, very happy to be still here too.
Fantastic. Number 19.
Okay, 19 sounds terrific. When I came back from the supermind, I thought that with so stupendous an outpouring of light, everybody would be lying flat. But when I opened my eyes, I found everybody sitting quietly and perfectly unconscious of what had happened. That's the Mother India, March 1975.
So the great victory of February 29th had hardly made any noise at all to the exterior world. The long-awaited supramental manifestation was certainly not proclaimed by beat of drum. The event passed all but unnoticed. According to the mother, only 4 people, 2 in the ashram and 2 outside, had any unusual experience at the time that signified that something of supreme relevance to the supramental yoga had occurred. She interpreted this blindness as stemming from a lack of spiritual receptivity. About 6 months after her first meeting with Sri Aurobindo on March 29th, 1914, the mother had written a prayer. Well, that's number 20. So Linda O'Neill, maybe you could read this one.
The Lord has willed, and thou dost execute. A new light shall break upon the earth. A new world shall be born, and all things that were promised shall be fulfilled. Yangar on the mother.
Thank you. So the plain sense of this was that the supramental change had been decreed by the divine, and that Sri Aurobindo was the means for promoting the transformation. The rest was for future unfoldment and realization. 32 years later, the divine's decree had been fulfilled. The manifestation had taken place. So she decided to reword her prayer in 1956. That's number 21. So let's see who's next on our list. Here. Oh, Marie Palmer maybe is still here, I hope.
Reading 21. Lord, thou hast willed, and I execute. A new light breaks upon the earth. A new world is born. The things that were promised are fulfilled. Iyengar on the mother.
So the mother went on to explain that this event concerned the whole earth rather than an individual or a few individuals. Thus, it would be more appropriate to call the phenomenon a manifestation instead of a descent. So on April 24th, 1956, the mother made the following announcement to all the disciples. Let me see here. Harold Rosen is still here, I hope.
Yes. Reading 22. The manifestation of the supramental upon earth is no more a promise, but a living fact, a reality. It is at work here, and one day will come when the most blind, the most unconscious, even the most unwilling shall be obliged to recognize it. The mother.
And as we were saying just a minute ago, it's the fact that it isn't recognized by most people is because they're not prepared enough. Even the disciples who had been meditating with the mother and Aurobindo for all those years missed this key event because they hadn't evolved enough to be able to perceive it. And so you can imagine what the rest of the world would be able to do with this information. It's just so far out of their realm of possibility. It's just not going to be something they recognize in their lifetimes.
Mark?
Yes.
Durham has shared a link, and maybe we could talk about that at the end because we're getting close to the end. And Jack has raised his hand.
Oh, okay. Jack, did you want to?
Yeah, about that link, there's something very important in there. I was peeking at it.
Okay, let's
and
take a look.
The mother attended Baha'i firesides in Paris with Mr. and Mrs. Dreyfus Barney, Mr. and Mrs. Scott. I don't know if that was mentioned before I came.
Yeah.
And she even spoke herself at some of the meetings with Abdul Baha.
That's right.
And said it was one of the most important periods of a spiritual development in her life. So she met Abdul Baha and she said she liked him. Well, who wouldn't? But anyway, that's an interesting Baha'i connection. Thank you, Dergam, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're almost done, folks. I just want to finish off and then we can have a wider discussion here. Let me just close my chat and start screen sharing again. Okay. So in 1954, the mother dreamed of a place that no nation could claim as its sole property, a place where the needs of the spirit and the care for progress would get precedence over the satisfaction of desires and passions, the seeking for material pleasures and enjoyment. So this is what eventuated out of that. Auroville, which was built within a few kilometers of Pondicherry.
Does it really have a sign behind it, or is that just on the photo?
No, that's
Looks like Hollywood.
That's something that's been added.
It's been added.
Photoshop. Auroville, the city of dawn, was inaugurated on February the 28th, 1968. A year after its establishment, the mother issued a statement spelling out the qualities and aptitudes expected of would-be Aurovillians. That's our reading number 23. And maybe Linda Russell could read that one. Let me just stop.
All those
Let's
who
go
wish
over
to
here we are.
all those who wish to live and work at Auroville must have an integral goodwill, a constant aspiration to know the truth and to submit to it, enough plasticity to confront the exigencies of work, and an endless will to progress so as to move forward towards the ultimate truth. And finally, a word of advice. Be more concerned with your own faults than with those of others. If each one worked seriously at his own self-perfection, the perfection of the whole would follow automatically.
On the first anniversary of Auroville's inauguration, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who was present at the time, highlighted the importance of Auroville. And let me see, how about Nina for this one?
Pondicherry was Sri Aurobindo's place of political exile and spiritual unfolding. His effulgence and message radiated to different parts of the world from Pondicherry. It is appropriate that seekers of enlightenment from various lands should found a new city there bearing Sri Aurobindo's name. It is an exciting project for bringing about harmony among different cultures and for understanding the environmental needs for man's spiritual growth.
And then there's the last sentence there.
May Auroville truly become a city of light and peace. On the mother.
Certain Baha'i characteristics to this notion.
Well, even the passage before about self-perfection and not about people, about somebody's own fault, there is a Baha'i writing about that as well.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And then just to wrap things up, let's take a last look at the chronology. So the mother finally dies on November 17th, 1973. I think she was 95 at that stage. She was placed in a separate chamber immediately above that of Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry. And then 6 years later, they started publishing a series of conversations between the mother and Satprem that they'd had between 1951 and 1973, which is now known as the Mother's Agenda in 13 volumes, which I have most of here. It's far more detailed than we have time to do anything more than just sort of pass over. Anyway, that's the end of my story about Aurobindo and the mother and their lives. I realize that I've done short shrift in a lot of different areas, but I think you can probably understand why. So, sorry, I did my best. So what are your reactions to all this information? I know it sounds pretty woo-woo in a lot of places. Outside our normal realm of experience. Anyway, why don't we just throw it open, see how you're feeling, what you're thinking.
Mark, before we do that, are you familiar with have you seen the link that Durham put up?
No, I haven't seen that, but I certainly will check it out right away tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that.
Mark, I have a question. Yeah.
Go ahead, Harold, and then Durham.
I'm sort of struck by the emphasis on the vertical, the ascent, but the absence of emphasis on horizontal relations, or on ethics, or service, or making the world a better place. Other than the statement about perfection interested me too. So the model of saving the world is that each person would become more perfect and more elevated and closer to God. But I still, maybe, I'm not saying it isn't there, but I didn't hear much of the horizontal dimension in what you presented. Maybe it's because you had limited time and you're emphasizing the vertical ascent,
yeah,
rather than the improving of the world.
Yeah, I have to say that, I mean, there are certain books that he wrote that I haven't studied that focus more on the impact, particularly on India's role in the future development of the world spiritually. I mean, it just didn't speak to me to the same degree as the vertical dimension, which is, I have to say, probably my own hobby. I've been following that kind of thing for a long time. So I'm more comfortable with that. But knowing that we have a Baha'i audience where that horizontal dimension is a primary focus, I felt that people could probably work with me to understand how the vertical development would have an impact on the horizontal.
Mark,
well, that's not a very substantial answer to your question, but it's a valid thing you've noticed, I think. Linda, you were going to say?
There are a couple of hands raised, Mark, Lori, and then Linda O'Neill.
I thought I saw a Durham though, almost
sorry,
at the same time as Harold. So
that's
let's
right.
go
Sorry.
there first.
Okay, two things. One is, when Baha'u'llah declared in Baghdad, according to the Baha'i writings, three things, like the significance of Ramadan, there are three things that he has introduced. One was the abrogating of the Holy War. Second was that there's no manifestation coming before 1,000 years. And the third one, he bestowed all names and attributes of God upon the whole world. And when I think of that sentence, which you can find in the writing of Balusi and others, I think how the influence of those words of Baha'u'llah on the whole world. You will see people coming from somewhere quoting words almost similar to what Abdul Baha said or what Baha'u'llah said. I just thought to mention this. That's number one. The second, maybe Hangama will help us. You see that one of the titles of the last Shah and Shah of Iran, Muhammad Pahlavi, was Arya Mehr. And I want to understand what is Arya here in the name Arya Mehr, if Hangama could help us, because it was a huge title. I don't know if Mehri is there. Because you mentioned that the meaning of Arya is noble or something. But I want to know what Arya Mehr means. And it's nothing related to this course, but
Arya is a very old word in history of the Iran. Okay. And Mehr, of course, Arya has a Mehr, because Arya is a foundation. Arya Mehr, when they say the top of the
history of Iran. Arya coming from very a specific word in the Farsi is Arya. Arya is something, and when you add to that mehr too, that's the meaning of is high level of kindness and something, because we are absolutely, we call ourselves Aryai, as a nation of Arya, okay? And Arya Mehr, that's the meaning of the person Arya, the personality of Arya, because had lots of kindness.
Thank you.
You know, Iranian, they call themselves Aryai. Is not from culture, is something on history of the Iran and Iranian people as a Aryai. They are not Indian, they are not Arab, they are not French or English, they are Aryai. Aryai is coming the name of Iranian nature, Iranian people, and it's very old. And Arya was probably more than 1,000 years ago, something, or more than that. Nejad Aryai, Nejad, as you know that, yeah.
I see
As far
Belinda
as I know.
looks like she really wants to get in on this conversation.
Oh, I say in Persian? Did I talk?
No,
No, why? That's the meaning of the king of Iran. It was the top of the kindness of the, one of the kindness of the Iran, Aryai person in Iran.
Yeah.
Who won?
King of Iran, yes. Muhammad Reza Shah Pahlavi Arya Mehr.
Okay.
Yes.
Belinda.
Well, Shan Shah is very, very old. It must go back to the first Persian Empire in the middle of the first millennium BCE. But yes, I read some years ago, there are two countries in the world that have as the name of the country derivatives of this word, Arya. And one of them, of course, is Iran. Iran is another version of Arya. Yeah, and the other one is Ire.
Yeah.
Ireland, Ire, is also a variation of this word. And I, at the time I came across this, it was very clear that the word means noble. And unfortunately, because of our not so dear friend, non-friend, Mr. Adolf, the word Aryan has acquired an unnoble piece of baggage. But we have to understand that now we're talking about the real thing, which does go back to Sanskrit and Old Farsi or Proto-Farsi, because they are sister languages.
Very good.
Okay, Linda, you said that there was a list of people who had their hands up.
Yes, Lori and Linda O'Neill.
Lori, I'm sorry.
And Linda O'Neill.
Oh, okay.
This is something completely different, but I was wondering, he was living in a Hindu society, and I didn't think that was the way that it was the custom or the belief after someone had died, what you do with the body.
Cremation.
I didn't know about burial. With that, I didn't know that burial was the way it would be done. It's just a small, very narrow query.
So because of the heat there, apparently 48 hours is the longest you can allow somebody to be unburied in that
Cremation.
climate.
I've got something wrong then. I thought that, yes, cremation was what happened, and I didn't think that burial would happen. So I just wondered, why they chose burial.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know the answer to that.
It's just such a little narrow thing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we were going to have Linda O'Neill. There she is.
I've been lazy this evening and just stretched out and behind my face there. He's a fascinating guy, you know, and the mother as well. This is kind of an irreverent thing. And of course, we can't compare Abdu'l-Baha to anyone or of any station. But it strikes me that, you know, Sri Aurobindo is like what Abdu'l-Baha could have done if he had the time or the interest in being a mystic. His life was so full of other things, you know, other responsibilities that he had of you know, material, spiritual, building the faith and so on, that clearly he would not have had time to do this kind of self-exploration. And maybe, I mean, maybe he didn't need to anyway, but, you know, you might ask, well, you know, why didn't Abdu'l-Baha become like this? Why didn't he, you know, manifest himself in this way? And to me, it just seems was not perhaps certainly not possible, but perhaps not even a worthy path for Abdu'l-Baha.
But of course, I'm just interested in any light that Aurobindo, with all of that interior work that he did, based on the Indian tradition, does he help us to understand what Abdu'l-Baha told us about the stages of the soul? That's really the reason for investigating Aurobindo in the first place. So I see Bill's hand up. Anybody
And
else ahead?
Jack as well, Mark?
Okay, well, let's hear from Bill first and then Jack.
I think Jack had his hand up first.
Did he? Oh,
yes.
Well, we've heard from Jack a couple of times, so let's hear from you first.
So in my simplistic understanding of things, like Baha'u'llah and the Bab, like, release this massive spiritual energy onto humanity. This is what I tell people when I try to explain the Baha'i faith to them. And it seems to me like there's some depiction here of spiritual energy being released upon humanity as well. And I'm wondering, is it a parallel thing that, you know, are these various people who have reached, you know, who have reached certain levels of spiritual access, you might say, allowing this to come through them, and this is all happening at once as a divine will of God? Is it vertical, as to say this is part of the spiritual energy release of Baha'u'llah and the Bab, and that affected people like Aurobindo and perhaps others who were wandering around then, causing things to happen, like happened with the Mormons coming about in similar time frame, etc.
Sorry, I got so wrapped up in the words as you were saying them, I lost the sense of the question. Could you give me a short version of that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not more articulate.
No, sorry, I get tired after doing a session. I think I lost my focus for a minute.
I'm just trying to see what the understanding is of you folks that know a lot of stuff about this, of the spiritual, the depictions of the releases of spiritual energy that I'm hearing are coming from these people who aren't Baha'u'llah and the Bab. And you can see that there was, you know, you know, just knowing history a little bit, you can see that there was a tremendous spiritual release at the time of Baha'u'llah and the Bab and thereafter. And so what I'm wondering is are these releases a product of the energy of, you know, are these just a byproduct or a derivative of the release of spiritual energy from Baha'u'llah and the Bab? Or are these parallel things parallel releases happening at the same time, because maybe like it's what God needs to do to make things happen.
Well, I think it's fairly clear just on the basis of who Baha'u'llah was that if there was any release of any energy happening, he was the one responsible for it. And it may be that they're time release capsules, that it, you know, they don't all hit us at the same time because we would be completely decimated by them. It has to be parceled out over time as we adjust to the information. And it's the same reason why the Kitabi Akdas wasn't translated until the 90s, right? Most of the people who were Baha'is at that time weren't ready to hear all of the details of that document until that period. And there are probably other things that will come later that we have no idea that are coming, that we have to grow up enough to be able to handle. And so I'm thinking that the light that Aurobindo is seeing and attempting to manifest was released by Baha'u'llah at some point before that. But he was, you know, the first one to get to that stage of self-development, to be able to perceive it, and then to invite it in to see what would happen. So I don't think there's more than one set of energy going on. I don't know how that sounds to you, but.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but I was, you know, I just wondered what everybody else, you know, what you thought, essentially, you know, what people who know stuff, you know, think about these things.
Well, I'm certainly open to hearing other people on that.
Oh, Mark,
Jack?
can I jump in again?
Yeah, sure.
You know, in the 1860s, there was a guy named Ramakrishna, you know, who really attracted a lot of attention.
Yep.
You know, as I read the history of India, it was asleep for about 300 or 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
The Sikh faith emerged, you know, in the early 1500s. But in terms of, you know, great gurus or thinkers like Aurobindo, there hadn't been one, it seems to me, going back to, say, Ramanuja, and before that, a couple of hundred years to Shankara. So, in other words, when India woke up, and the Baha'i explanation would be something like, well, new light was in the world, all things had been renewed.
Yep.
A figure like, another thing, it's hard for me not to think of Aurobindo as having intuitive knowledge. You know, we don't call him a scholar. I think, so he downloaded the information. I hate to use that crass metaphor, but he intuited the spiritual legacy of India. That's the way it looks to me.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't doing it with the school of hard knocks and study and comparison and analysis. He sort of intuited large pieces of it. And he used Indian language. He said, I met Krishna. Right? He didn't say Buddha. He didn't say Jesus. He didn't say Baha'u'llah. He said Krishna. So he was, in a sense, intuiting or downloading in a very vast sense India's legacy. And, you know, the idea of putting India on the map again in world history is extremely important. It's hard. I like his project in a way. I mean, the political side of it is that he was waking up India and representing what that means, to wake up India and to access its spiritual legacy.
I have to agree with what you're saying. I think you're right on there. Jack, you were going to say something there?
Alan, speak first, please.
Oh, Alan. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see your hand, Alan.
I was just going to remind us of a certain analogy that we've all heard, and I think I got this from Angus Cowan at one point. And he said you have to look at religion in much the way you would look at a mountain. It has many paths that go up to the top, but the top is the same for every path.
Yep.
And what I see happening with with Aurobindo, and I see it happening in many of the religions, including several of the Christian sects, is a transition over time to allow people to shake free of past ways of doing things, the standard way of doing things, if you will, being forced to accept that there are so many changes. And as a result of that, starting as individuals to climb this mountain, being forced actually to ask the questions that will lead people up to the summit of the mountain. And the only thing you'd want to add to that is the question, like, who gave the mountain shape? And of course, that goes back to the universe and the creator of the universe.
I can't argue with anything you said, Alan. I think you're quite right. So Jack, you had a question or a comment?
Well, you know, Mark, your class touches on so many different and important things that they're all rushing through my mind at once. So I'll just say a few things that are occurring to me. And I liked what Alan said. I like, Mark, what you said. I like what Linda said. I like what Bill said. Liked what Harold said. Liked everything about this discussion. Now, this business about the preservation of the yogi's body, for calling him, for want of a better term, I'll call Sri Aurobindo a yogi.
Yeah.
This was seen in other yogis as well after death. He wasn't the only one that stayed in a preserved state. Now, I don't know how to explain this, but you know, there are a lot of mysteries in life. Now, Curtis Kelsey said in one of his talks, he was the one that took the generators to Abdul Baha and electrified Mount Carmel with the help of an Iranian believer. And he said in that talk, when he was in Haifa, when Abdul Baha passed away, the greatest holy leaf asked him to take the picture of Abdul Baha on his deathbed. Now, I don't know why Bahir Khanum did this, but he did it. And then when Shoghi Effendi became guardian, Curtis Kelsey mentioned this to Shoghi Effendi, and the guardian asked him to destroy the negatives or the plates, whatever it was. So he did that. That's one thought. Here's another thought. You know, as Baha'is, we can say, you know, this spiritual revolution, this world renewal comes from the revelation of Baha'u'llah. That's what we believe. That's what our scriptures say. But let's remember that India's had, as Mark, you've remarked before, thousands of years of spiritual enlightenment. If anybody has explored the inner world in the world, it's the Hindus. They know more about this than anybody else. So I'm not surprised that people like Sri Aurobindo achieve these things, because we know that there are powers inherent in the human soul. I know from my own mystical experiences that began in my childhood, I can't access these powers all the time. I wish I could, because I'd be a very different person. They only seem to happen when I'm least expecting it. But I don't know how to explain this. But I think, Mark, you're on the path. Definitely, I agree with you that studying someone like Sri Aurobindo helps us to understand the greatness of the capacity of the human soul and of the transcendental realms.
Mm.
Now, here's another thought. This is not our work. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be studying Sri Aurobindo, but he had his work, we have our work. Now, as Linda said, Abdu'l-Baha had his work.
Yep.
And we know there was only one Abdu'l-Baha. You know, the disciples of Jesus used to argue about who was greater in the kingdom of God, right? So, as if it matters, but, and I guess there is an answer to that question, but we know categorically, I don't have to think about this too much. We know categorically from Baha'i theology that the manifestations are unique. Nobody else is in their category. That's a hierarchical position that nobody else shares. Next to that is Abdu'l-Baha, who's the mystery of God. And, you know, below that, there are incredible possibilities for human beings who want to explore this path. Like Baha'u'llah himself talks about the saints, the chosen ones. Who are these souls? I mean, they exist in every religion, and Sri Aurobindo was certainly one of those. So, you know, for me, he's telling us somebody who, for whatever reasons and by whatever means, was one of the chosen ones who was able to access this world. But it's not what God has given to humanity to do today. And so Baha'u'llah says in the Seven Valleys, basically, to put it very crudely, don't worry about it. Because if you believe in me, he says this explicitly. I mean, I'm putting it crudely, but he says it explicitly. If you recognize the divine manifestation, regardless of your faults, regardless of your sins of omission and commission and all that stuff, and you do the work, you will be invested with all the names and attributes of God, maybe not in this world, but in some other worlds. It's an endless journey toward the throne of God. And he tells us that you will attain all of the seven valleys. All of them, he says. So that is pretty remarkable. And I mean, I get very inspired when listening to all of you, as I'm learning a lot. And I mean, it's terrific. I mean, this is, Abdu'l-Baha calls this life the first life. It's just the beginning of our journey, right? And the possibilities are endless, really. So how lucky are we?
So I would only make one comment, Jack, on what you said. I mean, we could have a long conversation, but we're past our time, so I won't. But I would be a bit cautious with saying that the Hindus are the foremost explorers of inner consciousness. I'm not quite sure where the Buddhists would fit, because they have a very highly developed system as well. So
true.
We
Well,
could have a real conversation about that, but
oh, I agree. And the Sufis as well, you know.
Yeah.
But the Buddha appeared in India, but strangely enough, his religion took hold outside of India, you know, largely.
Yeah. Anyway, folks, I think I've probably worn everybody out. Oh, Mary's got a point.
Just I want to say thank you, all of all your work. You are working for us to our mind is getting more open. Anything more we know that we are getting more appreciate what we believe it. And this is really opening, and it was fantastic. I enjoy all minutes, and really it was good. Thank you so much. Who is going to do this kind of, course and search and bring to us and update us? Nobody. Thank you so much.
Well, this is Mark's work.
Yes, absolutely. Mark, keep.
None of you have to do it, so.
Thank you, Mark. It's wonderful.
I
Thank
guess
you, Mark.
she's trying to say, we love you, Mark.
Oh, right. Keep doing that so we don't have to do it. Yeah.
Keep the love. Keep the love.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much, folks. We'll see you in a week.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the heat.
Good night, everybody.
Namaste. Namaste.
Absolutely right.
I cannot say that.
everybody.
Linda, thank you. Thank you for your hard work too. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Good night, everybody.
Share the love. Share the love.
Oh, boy.